So one of the concepts I liked in the living rooms was this idea of the dawn, dusk, different types of daylight, which brings us on nicely to our next speaker, which is Gary Thornton from Nulty, not Gary Nulty from Thornton. Ooh. I first met Gary a couple of months ago when we were pitching to do some work on a signature building in London, which we won. Hey. So, but Gary's going to tell us today about that crossover between lighting in hospitality in the workplace and how you can use lighting to attract people back into the workplace. So please welcome him to the stage.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Gary Thornton. I'm a lighting designer at a company called Nulty. We're an independent consultancy based in London, and we work pretty much across all sectors from small private resis right up to huge master plans and everything in between, with hospitality and commercial workspace a huge chunk of what I work on and what I lead with one of the teams in the company. Historically, when it comes to light and lighting design within the commercial space, our discipline has tended to play second fiddle to architecture and interior design. And it's not that having to get anything against either of those spaces, but we are seeing a welcome shift to the understanding and appreciation that lighting can bring. Just as a quick survey, are there any other lighting designers in the room? Excellent, a flat 0, not feeling outnumbered at all. Well, I hope I don't offend anybody too much then. But I think whether you yourself are a lighting designer or you have experienced lighting design, what you'll be able to call out definitely is bad lighting. Now, aside from the absolute doom and gloom of this image, whenever you walk into a space, what you can feel and what you can see visually is invariably a huge factor of what the lighting is doing. Bad lighting typically is because the scheme doesn't consider what's going on in the room, who's using the space, and how it's going to be used over the course of a time. It tends to treat a space as an empty volume, an empty box that you need to alight to a certain level without any consideration of who's in it or how it's going to be used. Conversely, good lighting design puts people front and center of the space. Now, it may not look like it, but every image that I'm showing in this presentation is a commercial workspace. And I think Paul mentioned the idea of hotelification, which was a buzzword I was hoping to introduce, so thanks for that, Paul. But it is that crossover, that bleed across from hospitality back into what we're seeing in the workspace. And good lighting puts these people front and center. And I think because it is much harder to augment, we need to consider how the space is being used and who's in the space. And lighting is having this moment. It's really come into the fore of being accepted, rolling together, well-being, and creating these experiences and destinations for people to be enticed back into the office. Now, as the sort of title of this talk suggests, if we want to look at the evolution of workplace lighting, we need to look what's happened in the past, where we are now, and where we're looking to the future. And what I'm going to zip through these two really, really quickly because the exciting stuff is happening in here at the moment and where we're looking towards the future. So touching on the past, historically, workplaces tended to look a bit like this. Flat overhead, kind of 600 by 600 panels, really exacerbating bad lighting. And again, it's the sort of historic ethos of just lighting a volume, lighting a space, no consideration for the people in there, no consideration for the tasks and activities that will be going on. And we've actually come a really long way since then, unsurprisingly, seeing properties like NatWest are working on. There are still some workplaces that can be better considered, but there are also some really great examples of things that are going on. So, examples and techniques that we're seeing in the workplace now are layers of light that create kind of visual datums and accents as you move throughout the building. Making use of vertical surfaces. This is a really underused technique in workplace, but comes massively from hospitality. Whenever you're standing or walking through a space, you're rarely directly looking at the floor or the ceiling. What you do have is this huge peripheral vision and a backdrop against everything you do, which are the vertical surfaces, your walls. So by adding some light to them, by treating them as a bit of a feature, you can massively enhance the visual component of that space. And then again, very hospitality driven. creating softer areas supported by different styles of lighting that are these casual breakout spaces, these chance moments of conversation and opportunity that are really driving some of the innovation and creativity in the workplace. And if that's kind of the past and the present, where we are now is kind of here. We are designing in the present, but constantly looking towards the future. And a quote I read really recently was this: "The future is only the future until it's here." And anyone wanting to stay ready for the future of workplace is looking ahead at trends and forecasting and predicting. But what's really important, exacerbated by what's gone on recently with the pandemic, is being able to adapt in the moment. And so this is what we're seeing as briefs, requests, requirements from people looking to fit out workspaces with a new lighting scheme. The changing demands of an evolving workplace are looking for adaptability and flexibility in their lighting schemes. But what does that actually translate to in reality? It doesn't translate to Marmite specifically, but it's given rise to a couple of very Marmite phrases that are generally these kind of lovely marketing terms that clients are grabbing onto and asking us for, but actually they don't have a lot of meaning, or they're already a given in what any lighting designer should be doing. The first one is the idea of human-centric lighting. Now, if there were any other lighting design in the room at all, there would be a groan coming from that pocket of space where they'd all be clustered and sitting. Because the reality is, clients are asking us for this like it isn't already a given. Any lighting designer worth their salt, any lighting scheme that's worth anything to a workplace should be people-focused, it should be people first. And back to one of my earlier slides, it should be putting lighting where the people need it for the task that they're doing. We're not providing artificial lighting for the carpets or the desks or for the walls. We're providing it for people. All these inanimate objects get on fine just in the dark. All artificial lighting and the lighting schemes that we get on with, we're lighting for all of us. So everything we should be doing is already human-centric. And the second term, slightly less Marmite, but still wildly understood by a lot of clients, asking us for circadian lighting. Now, in the truest sense, we can't replicate daylight in its entirety, the full range of colour, the full range of wavelength that it goes to. And we also wouldn't want to. The brightness levels that entrain a circadian response or a biological response in people is well upwards of 1,000 lux. And actually, we're dealing in the hundreds, not the thousands in the workplace. So anything that's going to entrain kind of a meaningful biological response isn't going to happen from artificial lighting, particularly in the workplace where, you touched on it as well, the idea of moving away from that 500 lux. This standard, this guideline that just defaults, we put 500 lux on a desk, is actually quite an outdated standard. We don't need that amount of lighting on a flat surface, particularly when virtually all we're doing at the moment is screen-based. And it creates this sort of very flat, uninspiring space to work in. We should be looking at layers and accents and different datums of light throughout the entire volume of a space. But that doesn't mean that we can't take cues from what daylight is doing and create schemes that are a bit better than what we have at the moment. One thing that's really allowing us to do that quite well is technology. And a few years ago, I had an opportunity to visit a tech company that was kind of really looking at moving this forward and how we could embed technology in particular light fittings, and kind of the birth of the Internet of Things. And that's a much younger me, a few years ago, kind of having a little eureka moment when I realised that technology and technology embedded in lighting was changing the perception of what lighting design was and what we needed to do as lighting designers. No longer were we just people that were deciding what to light and what not to light. We were becoming experienced designers. Everything we were doing, particularly in the workplace, was about creating an experience for people to come in, something that was different from what they can get in their home environment. And as an example of this, this example is perhaps a couple of years ahead of the curve in what we were looking at, but it was suitable for a commercial workspace that aptly was a group of risk assessors. When you come out of a lift lobby and step into a commercial workspace when you first arrive, it's usually quite a bright, warm, welcoming space. This was about creating an experience for them to bring their clients in. So instead of stepping out a lift into a brightly lit space, you stepped out deliberately into a blacked out box. This is their lift lobby. The moment you step foot outside the lift cabin, a sensor picks you up, triggers lighting on, and immediately you've got this semi-Instagram heavy, but a kind of an experience for people. And it was about them giving something to their clients when they brought them into their space. They weren't like any other office. They were creating a destination and experience, not only for their own employees, but, you know, being a bit of a buzz, being a bit of a moment when they brought clients in and saying, wow, these guys are something different. This is a space we want to come and visit because we get an experience here that we can't get anywhere else. And if you think about those experiences, the spaces that you all like to visit over and over again, whether it's a hotel, a restaurant, or a bar, what is it about that space that you like? It's because it gives you an experience. It's a destination that you can go to about having something unique or different or something lovely. And the lines between workspace and hospitality are blurring. I'm not saying you're going to come and sit up at this bar and have a cocktail and do your work, but we are seeing these kind of influences pulled into the commercial space. In any kind of hospitality, that restaurant that you love isn't pulling you back over and over again for the food. Yeah, it might have a great chef, but it probably also has great interior design, great acoustics, great lighting. All of those things come together to give you an experience. And lighting is one of those unsung heroes of a space because it's so intangible and it's so invisible until it strikes that surface and bounces back and hits your eye. And that's what you're seeing and that's what you're perceiving. And because when the lighting works well, whether it is a bar or a commercial space, it looks and feels great. You want to spend time there. And it shouldn't just be reserved for hospitality. Given the amount of time we all spend in our offices and how much time we want people to spend in their offices, shouldn't that be what we're demanding of our offices as well as our bars and our restaurants in the evening? Light has the power to engage employees, elevate mood, increase productivity, and of course support health and well-being, which is a big driver of spaces like this that we're seeing in the workplace. And at the heart of providing an appealing environment for people to work in, it's offering people a choice, whether they want something a bit more relaxed or a bit more formal, but it is the absolute antithesis of a space like this. This is not comfortable. This is not what people are choosing to spend time in. These are not desirable spaces. It might look like a cool photo at first instance, but actually to spend any time in there, it's harsh, it's glaring, it's really uncomfortable. So, you know, to reiterate again, good lighting is for people. It puts those people front and center of what you're doing and why you're doing it. We shouldn't be lighting spaces like Cat A fit-outs, which largely should be abolished, but slight tangent, we can talk about that in the break. You know, these are the spaces that people want to spend time in because the lighting in particular is considerate to what they're doing and how the space is going to be used. And with these people front and center, they are then choosing to come back because they can't get the sense of community anywhere else. We spent a good couple of years, if not slightly more, curating our own work from home spaces. So we've got to know what we like and what we don't like. Do you want to sit next to the window? Do you want to pull the blind down? Do you want to put the big light on? Do you want to grab a task light and put it together? We've been curating our own space for lighting amongst all the other attributes. And because we now have a good idea of what we do and don't like, getting people back to the workplace where they don't necessarily have those choices is a bit of an obstacle. I don't think we can put people back in absolute control of all their lighting elements, but what we can do is put them in control of certain elements. It could be as simple as task lighting. You know, a simple task lamp on their desk, boost light levels when it's needed, turn it off when it's not, give them localized controls so they're not waving their arms in the air looking for a PIR that's slightly out of reach, or they feel it's too bright, too warm. Something like giving localized control to people is a really good way to do that. Or it could be mimicking some of what we have at home. This is a workspace that has the absolute opposite of what we're used to seeing in the ceiling. All the light levels and sufficient light levels to the desk are with 40mm aperture downlights. That is adding all the light we need, but it's softened and added by individual task lamps on the desk. So if people want to boost the lighting or they want something slightly warmer or slightly more localized, they are in control of that in addition to what the BMS is doing in the ceiling. Or it's something that's very changeable. You know, day, night, evening, your tables, your furniture, your walls, they're all identical. They are static, they don't change. But what can change is the lighting. Okay, this space earlier in the day was hosting meetings and kind of breakout workspaces. Come towards the end of the day, the lighting changes completely. It dims right down. We take everything out the ceiling. There's a couple of low-level elements, and there are kind of rest pods and yoga spaces. And the only thing that's changed in that room is the lighting. During the day, for 6-7 hours, it is a sort of traditional workspace, as it were, but with the lighting that can change, you then be able to offer people things like this that they can't necessarily get at home. And so when we look forward, what do we see? Lots of these components, for me, I think we've all been talking about for a while, but they've been really quite underused or not installed to their fullest ability. Biophilic design, and as a sort of design philosophy, I think we're all fairly familiar with this approach. In its purest, most literal sense, it is this innate connection with daylight and nature, and how we can take cues from nature into the built environment. And as a component of the natural world, daylight is one of the strongest visual things we have. As a diurnal species, we evolved under it for years, much longer than we've lived under artificial lighting, and it's baked into our psyche, baked into our psychology. And if I could just take a second to ask you, all imagine your favourite natural scene, your outdoor scene, a scene of nature. Take a second to think. We've probably got a few sunsets, lots of nods, a few beaches, might be sunset, a sunrise, it might be a meadow, it might be walking, okay? It's a few more nods, I think that's capturing most people. Regardless of what you thought of, it probably had a sunny sky. That daylight component that was building up the visual in your head was such a huge ingrained moment. We all know what daylight looks like, and we all know what it's supposed to look like. But even if anyone that hasn't nodded along yet was thinking, well, that's not me, it wasn't a daylight scene, it might have been something at night, but it still probably had a light source. Anyone that thinks about those lovely nighttime moments, it's where you can see stars, where you had a campfire, it's still got a light source in it. We know exactly what lighting is supposed to look like. And yes, safety and function is all very important for lighting to provide in the workplace, but that visual cue, that visual moment is what we all really desire when we go into a space and have a look at something. And so if we look at biophilic design as a principle and what we can pull indoors, it might be something very literal. It might be the layering mimicry of light and shadow. Now this is a really excellent effect because it's entirely artificial, but feels very real, feels very natural. It makes you want to go and sit under there because it feels like you're being outdoors, even though you don't have any access to that space. But one of the other things that's really interesting about biophilic design and thinking about daylight and what it does is the light source for daylight moves all the time. It sounds obvious when you look at this. We all have seen this picture a number of times, but until you say it out loud, that light source over the course of the day is moving. And that is one of the tricks that daylight plays on us that artificial lighting can't do. We're not DMX winching lights up and down like we're in the theatre. We have fairly limited ceiling voids and spaces, and so we're not physically moving light fittings, but what we can do is introduce different datums of light throughout the day. So we can have light from the ceiling at high level. Right now, you've got a little bit of light on your desk that really starts to stand out once you dim everything else down. We can talk about lighting the vertical surfaces again. So we can't move the lights themselves, but we can move the lit effect up and down from your eye line over the course of a day. And something that is inherently biophilic, something that feels visual and changeable. Yes, we might be blessed and have some large windows letting in absolute daylight, but actually something that feels visually and emotionally changeable is what biophilic lighting is looking for and is really all about. And one of the things about a biophilic approach is that it has to be joined up. It's not just the lighting, it's not just the acoustics, it's not just the wayfinding, the furniture design. Unless we all speak to each other and do it holistically across all the disciplines, that biophilic-led approach is going to fall down. I think we're all familiar with this as a case study. This is a good example of how things are being joined up and how it's coming together. But what you won't get is, if any one of these disciplines drops out, you won't get that biophilic approach. There's no point having fantastic lighting if you're to regimented office cubicle desks. You won't have no point having beautiful green walls if they haven't got a maintenance plan. And one of the interesting things is there are no straight lines in nature, so it's entirely illogical to think that a workplace should follow a conventional path where it is lighting or where people want to sit. If we're leading from that nature-first approach, then we have to look at nature, see what that's doing really well, and implement that rather than trying to do it the other way around. Sometimes spaces should feel a bit more homely and hospitality-led. And again, this is a workspace that prioritizes people over place and is creating destinations and demonstrates the need for more nuanced environments, whether you do need to read or be focused or spend time in a sort of more relaxed space that's got warmer lighting. This is a bit more traditional, this is a bit more formal than the last photo, but I like it because it shows the power of light. This uses a tunable white light source that kind of over time ebbs and flows over the course of a day. On one side, you've got very formal, very focused workspaces, but just by warming up the color temperature, introducing a lit vertical surface, you suddenly create different spaces that people can seek out at the different times of day. And it happens very subtly. In the morning up until early afternoon, it is a bit crisper, it is a bit cooler for that focus and that punch. Come to sort of post-lunch in the afternoon, things subtly get a bit warmer, and you introduce all these other vertical surfaces, and you see people leaving their desks, huddling together at these pause moments and dwell moments, and having collaborative conversations that they weren't otherwise having. Now, when someone mentions biophilia, this is kind of greenery and green walls is what springs to mind. And I want to do a bit of myth busting in terms of the lighting for here, because yes, plants need light, absolutely. But much like us, they are diurnal. They need that visual relief. They need the light and dark to survive. But they also need the maintenance scheme in terms of the watering and the pruning and everything that goes with it. But what they do need often is a high exposure to light. As you move inboard away from windows, deeper into the floor plate, you don't tend to have the abundance of natural light. And actually, if you're looking to locate a green wall, absolutely artificial lighting can supplement it, but we don't want to be the only light source that's doing it. Because in order to put usually upwards of 1,000 lux over the width of a green wall, it uses quite substantial wattages. And, that is counterintuitive to lots of the sustainability credits that are being targeted at the moment. Things like everything on this screen here, I think we all know the names if we don't know the details of them, but these are no longer aspirations for workplaces. These are requirements that we all need to dig in and develop for. And rightly so, if we want to stand a chance of hitting the UK government's net zero target by 2050. There's a few facts here that really stand out. And so, if 40% of UK carbon comes from our building, there isn't a success to the 2050 scheme unless we act on it. 20% of the world's electricity use is lighting. That's what we're doing. And more than 80% of the building stock for that 2050 goal already exists. So refurbs, fit outs, they need to have a scheme that endures. We're not just talking about new builds, we're talking about refurbishments and the idea that fit outs can be flexible. So when tenants move in, they are minimising embodied carbon and everything that goes along with it. This is an art installation that really leans into what nature is having a massive word with us about right now. This is the amount of destruction needed to the earth in order to extract this much copper. Scale that up by everything we're doing, and it's clear that we need to stop taking virgin materials out of the ground. We need to move away from what has traditionally been a very linear cycle of input, production, use, and then it goes in the skip, it goes in the bin, it goes in landfill. What we need to do for an enduring scheme, whether it is lighting or furniture or tenancy, is move towards a circular economy, where again, much like the biophilic approach, this has to be joined up. Okay, it has to be considered cross-discipline from everybody involved. And one of the things, there are a number of lighting manufacturers that are leaning in towards this at the moment, but what we need to make sure in that very joined up way, that final segment of FM and maintenance is, should a downlight fail, we need a mindset shift from that person taking it out the ceiling, that they don't just drop it in the skip. They scan the QR code on the back of it, it goes back to the manufacturer, it gets refurbished and put out back into the world rather than taking more raw materials out of the scheme. And so if we can get towards this circular approach, can we get to interior design schemes and lighting schemes that are an absolute dream? Wouldn't it be great if when a new tenant moved into a space, the interior scheme and the lighting scheme was so robust and so flexible, all they needed was a new sign over the door? That would be an incredible definition of circular economy, sustainability, and those three buzz points that I think are going to be the future of workplace design. And so combining lots of these ideas, what we will see is lighting for people, but workplaces becoming a place of community. Every action we had through lockdown was so carefully curated and dialed in and put into a calendar. But what we need to re-enhance those moments of chance collision. What is our modern water cooler moment? We don't have these moments where we pass each other and bump into each other, or can pause and sit on a sofa together. We spent 2 years scheduling calls just to have a quick catch up, and it felt so very deliberate and almost quite artificial. What we need is to bring this ethos back in the short term future. And kind of as a trend of what we're seeing in hospitality, guest rooms are getting smaller in hotels to open up amenity spaces and give more footprints for everything that's going. And I think this trend will continue in terms of workspaces, formal workspaces and desks getting smaller, Nokia building out for these breakout spaces and kind of casual interactions. And that will naturally lead to buildings being decategorized. Your workspace has a number of spaces, or will do, that will look like a residential living room or a bar or a hotel. Your new meeting room is going for a walk in the park or along the street with somebody. And actually it works the other way. This is new Brewdog at Waterloo, and as a bar, they have workspaces and Zoom rooms. So it's a very two-way street that we're walking down, the decategorization of buildings. And just to finally touch on longer term in the future, we've got AI, we've got VR, dare I say the metaverse as well, for want of a dirty word. But, is this the future of the office? I mean, I hope not, truly, but I think elements of it will ebb into what we're doing. They will bleed into what we're doing. The advancement of technology drives so much of what we do. That phone that you've got in your pocket, several thousand times more powerful than the computer that put the rocket on the moon in the 60s. But do we want to condense the workspace down to something that fits in your pocket? I don't think so. For me, that's not the way it's going. But the future workplace for us is dynamic, responsive, and daylight-led. Typically, if you ask to envisage the future, it's a bit dystopian, but I think we need less Blade Runner and more people-first design, particularly with lighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We haven't had anyone speak on lighting for a couple of years at Workplace Trends, so it was great to hear that and to get an update and learn about all the latest thinking and technology. We do have some questions already on the Twitter feed, but I'm just going to pop one in there. Cat A should be abolished?
Fitting out lighting to Cat A that immediately gets stripped out is an absurd waste of energy. I understand if you want to do a small section or a single floor plate, but there's absolutely no need to replicate that through the building when you know in 6 weeks' time it's all going to go in a skip. Or until we link up the WE directive and consider the contractors that will take that out and put in another Cat A fit out, and again, complete that circle of what we're talking about. There's so much waste at the moment. Yeah. So
it's absurd. Yeah. And so I've done quite a bit of work in acoustics, and the value engineers tend to take some of the better acoustic ideas out. I imagine for you guys, they see the health and safety, the lowest common denominator stuff, but all this wonderful stuff, how do you get that through?
With difficulty. I think it's, if we're working with a client that has employed us as a consultancy, you're over that first hurdle of someone knowing they need a lighting designer, which we're not always the first consideration on there. And then it's just having those conversations with the client very early about budget, about expectations, about delivering what we can. So much of what we do, particularly at the stages kind of 2 and 3 of a project, is about educating the client, talking to the architects and interior designers that we tend to work closely with anyway, but the client is someone that comes in, maybe they know they need a lighting designer, or maybe they've been told they need a lighting designer, but they're not quite sure of the value we can bring. So it's talking them through principles and things like this and saying, if you cut X, you will have a detriment Y. It's not all about that immediate supply price at the bottom line. You can bake in value further down the chain.
Absolutely. Mark, you tweeted a couple of questions. I know you're not shy, so you might as well say what they are. Can we get a mic to... Not even these ones.
Is it a subject that you have looked at, and can lighting help?
It can, yes. I think there are so many unknowns and so much research going on at the moment. There is a reluctancy for companies and clients to dive too deep in that and lock in something that we're not quite sure about. I mentioned it earlier, but the idea of circadian lighting, there's so much research and unknowns going into that at the moment that it's very much still a kind of watch this space at risk of doing something that's at detriment to the people in that space. So I think it's important to create these nuanced environments where people have localized controls. They can make it warmer or brighter or cooler or dimmer, whatever they need to suit what they're doing. But in terms of implementing that and a wider scheme, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Thanks. Neil?
What would you do with the lighting in here?
Well, there's a couple of big spotlights in my face, but I appreciate that's to do with the cameras rather than anything else. I think what's gone on in here is the need to cater for a very flexible space. It's hard for me to comment without knowing budgets and the brief and everything that went with it, but I think what it does is allow everyone to see me. You've got a little uplift on your kind of horizontal plane. That is certainly not 500 lux, but you can see it's more than enough light to work with, so that's quite important. But I think there are some opportunities, like you can see here, the easy quick add-on is adding something to a vertical surface that we spoke about, but that could run as a permanent feature up the walls and create a bit more visual interest. There are a few little add-ons that could be considered.
Window would be nice, but we're in the basement, aren't we? Adrian, down the front here.
Thank you for the presentation, fantastic. What are the words to use at the early stage when setting up a kind of project brief so that it's properly embedded into the budget? Because you won't let us use human-centric. If we use the word responsive, QS doesn't really understand that. It might be and so on. So when you're setting up the initial brief, how do you pass that on to others that lighting is important?
I think that the brief, if it's not coming from us, it can be as plain as you like. It can be very everyday language about understanding how the space is going to be used. If you tell me a space needs to be flexible or it needs to be different in the morning and the evening, I can then start to work out, okay, we might need dimming, we might need sensors, we might need tunable white, and then we'll put that into our stage 2 report as a proposal, and we'll kind of augment and articulate what we're doing in response to that brief, the way we've understood it, because most of our briefs come from clients or PMs that are not versed in lighting vocabulary. But part of our role is to interpret that, tease out what they're actually after, flip it back around and present it to them as a lighting scheme that meets these KPIs or the attributes of the space they're looking for. But more often than not, it's not something you can put in an email and a report. It's often a very verbal conversation that you can gesture and get sort of very human-led with, and people will get that ethos from you rather than it being a set of bullet points that's very hard and fast.
So can we just thank Gary for that update on the latest thinking on lighting? Thank you very much, Gary.